it often seems like the scientific community is completely against the carnivore diet and against ketogenic diets. And at least with the latter, with ketogenic diets of various kinds, we have seen the scientific community, through its business arm, big business, shift its attitudes a little bit, mostly because of profit potential for carnivore diets. Go to Costco as a good example of this. Is my usual go-to when describing this. Go to any store really, but Costco is the biggest offender. You will see all sorts of silly products labeled keto, and when you look at them, they're actually not keto at all, unless you think making a sandwich with ketogenic bread is it's okay to have a third of your carbs for the entire day just in those two slices of bread. Stay away from that stuff mostly, folks. Anyway, when you look at the food labels, they're disgusting slop, and you probably don't want that stuff in your body. But it seems like the scientific community, especially if you are further down that proper human diet spectrum on the full carnivore or semi-carnivore side of things, it seems like the scientific community is against us. And no matter what evidence we may bring to the table, they don't really seem to care. And a lot of people don't understand it because they have, unfortunately, total faith in science, the scientific process, and for whatever reason, have actually believed and bought into the entire lie that the scientific community is all about dialogue and actually, testing a hypothesis, presenting data, and then having their peers review the data and re-present the thesis and see if they can duplicate the results in a laboratory setting, or critique studies as if, to see if they actually stand up to scientific scrutiny. The way we are told the scientific method is, when the reality is it's actually not true. There is a scientific orthodoxy because science is often presented not as a methodology and a set of tools and sort of an underlying philosophy for how to find out facts about the material world. Science is often treated as religion. In religious circles, it sometimes gets called scientism because there are people who take science and elevate it to something that it's not. Because all science is a methodology. That's really what it is, and it's with an underlying philosophy for how to find facts about the world. And when people kind of confront this, they get, at least very uncomfortable, because the entire modern world is built on this. And like any other orthodoxy, there is, of course, heterodoxy, and those are things that go against the grain of what is accepted and acceptable as values in that world. And sometimes in the scientific world, you want a little bit of the natural gatekeeping that goes along with it. Some idiot gets up here on, social media and starts telling you that, hey, I'm having some nasty health problem, and I'm going to go right to the stereotypical kind of brain dead response to what is causing this, instead of actually getting a professional analysis and finding out that you've got some rather basic health issue that can be taken care of with better hygiene or something. They go to some other wild, wacky theory. You see that all the time. But in reality, for most part, when it comes to in the carnivore world, the unwillingness of credentialed scientists to look at the proper human diet and our claims to see if they stand up to scrutiny. They are just unwilling. You know this, and I know this, because while medical doctors, aren't strictly speaking scientists, what happens when you bring up the carnivore diet to the typical medical practitioner? You get stared at as if you have lost your mind, and even though they don't have much food training to begin with themselves. I think it was Dr. Barry who has talked about how in one video or another of his, how most medical doctors only get 30 minutes or one session of a class once in med school on nutrition, which goes a long way to explaining quite a lot. And this reminded me of something I studied in grad school myself. It was a book in a class I had to take called The Philosophy of Social Sciences. And the most important book, in fact, the only book in that class I think that I kept, was a book called A Theory of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. And Kuhn was a philosopher of science back in like the 60s and 70s, and he wrote about this thing called paradigm shifts. Paradigm is sort of like a ruling idea of how things are and the view that goes with it. He talked about these paradigm shifts in the scientific world, because as it turns out, the problem with science that we see today, with absolute corruption in the sciences, it has its roots going back to the beginning of the scientific method in the Middle Ages. It really does. You get essentially the ruling group of scientists keep a absolute lock on what is and what is not acceptable beyond, basic ethics concerns and moral concerns and things, and then get wrapped up in it with interests who can pay for their research. This goes all the way back. This is not a modern problem at all. It's just we have possibly the worst expression of that in human history now. And the example he uses of what this looks like, of this kind of the scientific community essentially itself working against the interests of science itself, was this, I can't even say this without laughing, but there was this time for hundreds of years where the scientific community was convinced that phlogiston was real. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's probably because you are a modern person who've never spent any time reading about the history of science, which is fine. Most people don't need to. But phlogiston was this idea that fire had a physical substance that could be captured. We know that fire has no physical substance, but they believed for hundreds of years that fire had a physical substance. That was like a law of science. It wasn't even to be questioned. The only thing scientists were trying to figure out was how to encounter that physical state of fire and capture it. And if you were against that, you were shunned as a scientist. You were pushed to the side. You were treated as if you had nothing of value to be brought to the table, that you were not a serious scientist, and you were kept from the halls of power. And it took hundreds of years for scientists to overcome that. Now think about this in the context of nutrition. What does the current paradigm say? The current paradigm, it's only been around a few decades, says that saturated fat is bad. And there's already some backpedaling going on with that, because I suspect because of advanced technology, communications technology, and social media. I think those are a very big reason why the current anti-saturated fat paradigm is wobbling right now. But what is not really wobbling is the plant-based paradigm. I often like to say that we are winning, and we are. With the average consumer, we are winning. But the authorities are convinced that health-based or plant-based foods are healthy, that the only way to have good human diets and good human health is to have a predominantly plant-based diet, which most Americans, by the way, now already live on. Most of us already are on plant-based diets. All you have to see is most people get something like 70% of their calories every single day from plants, from breads, from eating potatoes predominantly. That's where they get most of their calories. Sugar's a plant. How much sugar does the average American eat every day? Far more than you or I would like to think about in reality. How long is it going to take that paradigm to go away? I don't know. But if you're a reasonably literate person, and I don't mean that like in a derogatory way, like if you think reading philosophy and denser independent texts are an enjoyable experience, go get that book, Thomas Kuhn's A Theory of Scientific Revolutions. It will open your eye on this. And it'll also make you question other scientific orthodoxies in the world today. I found the last few years to be particularly wacky in terms of science and the talking about science from authorities in the world. Or if you think there are certain subjects taboo that are directly related to the carnivore world, like, the effect of animals on the environment and the just underlying problem with the environment that you have to accept, otherwise you'll get kicked off of these spaces. Go read A Theory of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. In the scientific world, you're supposed to question everything. Every scientific claim needs to be questioned. You should have the right to do so. You should have the right to do so on any platform. And you should have the expectation that scientific claims wrapped up in science, will be free and open to questioning, and that you can ask for data, and that they should be forced to present it to you. Anything else is ideology. Ideology is not science. It's scientism. Curious what you thought of this in the comments. Let me know if you've read that book, if you had to read it in college like I did. It's like, again, one of the very few books from that phase of my grad program that I bothered to keep. But let me know in the comments if you've read that book, Thomas Kuhn's A Theory of Scientific Revolutions. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this. like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help, as does sharing this on social media. That helps a lot too. I'm Anthony Stine, the Practical Carnivore, and thanks for tuning in today.